It's day 72. It's also July 16, 2019. And we are in Hardman, Oregon. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life. Life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description. Hey there. Welcome back. So where was I? Oh yeah, headed out of Hepner and looking to find more cool stuff along Oregon's Blue Mountain Scenic Byway. Our trek would continue to offer even more unknown worlds. Unknown to me, anyway. I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. It is crazy to me that I spent 8 years of my life in Oregon, and apparently I spent each and every one of those 2,920 days running around in circles, looking at, seeing, touching, experiencing the same things over and over and over. When, yet again, there was a world of history, a world of things to discover in my own backyard. Each and every time I hopped into the car for a run to the coast or to Portland, I could have simply just chosen to go in a different direction, and I would have seen and experienced something completely different. So many have gone before us, worked through unimaginable odds, hardships, even tragedy, to leave us what we have here today. They had a dream, a vision for their future, and it's pretty super cool to relive those adventures and learn what so many worked so hard for. Reading a historical marker about the trials and tribulations of a group of folks blazing the Oregon Trail some 160 years ago, and learning that over 500,000 settlers would embark on what at the time was considered a treacherous journey. Some 2,000 miles from the banks of the Missouri River in Independence, Missouri, to what is now known as the Willamette Valley in Oregon. They would make this journey on foot, in oxen and mule-driven wagons, and on horseback, averaging just 10 to 20 miles per day. It is estimated that 1 in 10 would die during the journey as the result of disease, drowning, even freak accidents like shootings, and being crushed under the wheel of a wagon attempting to navigate the harsh terrain. In the end, total loss of life is unknown, but settlements would spring up all along the trail as folks decided they'd gone far enough. But it's also estimated that around 80,000 would ultimately make it to and settle in this magical new place full of hope for the future. A place they called the Oregon Country. And I gotta say, taking a deep dive into the specifics around what a day in the life of a settler might have looked like, what it might have felt like, well, maybe the next time I wake up and realize I'm out of cream for my coffee, or the internet's down, well, it probably won't ruin my day. Instead, maybe I'll just take a walk. Or get in the car. You know, the one that starts with the turn of a key and moves itself when I press a pedal on the floor. And go find a historical marker. And stand there for a minute, listening to the past. And to what life was, or maybe what life is. Or more importantly, what it should be. From the Oregon Scenic Byway official website, I've already quoted a little from this site, but let's dig in a little bit deeper. Quote, "This 145-mile route cuts the corner of Interstate 84 in northeast Oregon, leading through ranching communities and up into the forests and wilderness areas of the Blue Mountains. Expect high temperatures in the summer and winter snow in the higher elevations. The only reliable gas can be found in Hepner. I'll tell you a funny story about this in a minute, but suffice it to say, there would be yet another lesson around life on the road, learned here in the Blue Mountains. Medical services and hospitals are located in Hepner, LeGrand, Baker City, and Pendleton. The fact that they make a point of telling you where medical services are available should give you an idea of just how rural this area of the country can become. There's even a section that talks about potential road closures with a telephone number included so you can call ahead to make sure the roads are open before you head into these mountains and the adventure they offer. The site goes on to say, "It's always tempting to make a beeline for Oregon's magnificent coast, but this byway encourages you to take it slow, not only to navigate the often narrow and twisting road, but to discover the many attractions hiding just beyond the highway." At its heart, this is ranching country. The west end of the byway begins along the Columbia River, where OR 74 leads south from I-84 to the Heppner Junction. The Willow Creek Wildlife Area provides habitat for upland game birds and waterfowl. The Oregon Trail passed through what is now Cecil, Oregon, with thousands upon thousands of pioneer wagons pulled by oxen and mule teams making their way west in the 1850s. For a brief detour off the highway, follow the Oregon Trail marker 13 east to an information kiosk at Wells Springs, where deep wagon ruts still furrow the earth to this day. And back on the byway, the route winds along the Willow Creek, surrounded by rolling wheat fields and hillsides dotted with livestock. The communities of Ione and Lexington began as sheep stations in the 1800s and still maintain classic examples of frontier architecture. Close quote. It's hard to grasp sometimes just how many personalities Oregon actually has. A day of driving along the Blue Mountain Scenic Byway will expose you to many different types of the state's beauty. Hours of driving through ranch land, rolling hills lush with tall green grasses, and no shortage of historic markers along the Pioneer Trail. And, in typical Oregon fashion, tall thick pines lining the occasional creek or river is never very far away. Hardman is a piece of this area's history, a community located in southern Morrow County. It grew to be a social and commercial center for the surrounding farm communities until the railroad to Heppner, completed in the early 1920s, essentially turned it into a ghost town. In fact, as I first started to look things up on the internet about the town, you don't come across a bunch of official websites or detailed accountings. In fact, the second thing you'll read is an article titled "Oregon's Ghost Town." What I would learn is that this would be the first place I had driven through that came and went in a flash. I think it was this stop that very likely planted the seeds of curiosity for me. Why are there so many small towns across the country that sprung to life, boomed, and then faded into history within just a matter of a few years? What I would also learn is that there are many common threads in the rise and fall of these towns. And with each stop, I also wondered when things might come full circle for these little slices of Americana. I mean, in a world of internet, solar power, drones, and battery-operated cars, why not pick the perfect spot and have the best of both worlds? It's called small-town America, and I kind of feel like we should do it again. In Hardman's case, just one more of what would become many stories of how towns happened and why they went away. The area around what eventually became Hardman in the late 1800s, when settlement in the area started as actually two separate communities just a mile or so apart. The one community, known as Dairyville, was referred to by the locals as Yaller Dog. The soon-to-be bustling community up the road would be referred to as Raw Dog initially, as the two communities began to compete for a stage stop. At the time, the only overland form of transportation through the area was by stagecoach, so whichever landed the stop would certainly prosper. In the end, Raw Dog would land the stop, and over time the two communities would essentially merge into one and for a short period of time be referred to as Dogtown. The area would be referred to in area newspapers as one of the best farming sections in Morrow County, or in any of the country for that matter. The area would also be referred to as the Bunch of Grass Hills. Another name that shows up early in the area, Adamsville. One article referred to Adamsville as Yaller Dog and Dairyville being called Raw Dog. But given record keeping at the time, it's tough to nail down exactly where these canine-oriented monikers originated, or even why. It wouldn't matter after a time when in 1881, postal officials decided to establish a post office in the area. It was determined that Raw Dog or Dogtown would be unsuitable, go figure, so the area was renamed Hardman, after a local homesteader. As mentioned, for many years, the area would steadily grow, ultimately reaching a population of nearly 1,000 residents. The bustling freight trade through the area, combined with being a local commerce and trade center for the area's farming communities, would sustain the area's growth. And again, local newspapers would herald Hardman for its position on the plateau as a thriving center for commerce. At its height, the town had its own schools, stores, newspaper office, saloons, brothels, and even a skating rink at one point. The Hardman Hotel would boast an advertisement for their $12 per month rooms and 25-cent home-cooked meals, and even a livery station kept well-stocked with hay and grains. Fortunes would shift for Hardman just a few years later in 1881 when the area's first train depot would be established some 20 miles away in Heppner. The railway connected Heppner to the busier commerce corridors of the Columbia River Gorge area. This connection would also eventually lead to future railways tying Oregon's interior to the heavy north and south traffic through the Willamette Valley, which connected California, Oregon, and Washington. The decline in Hardman would take a few years, but by 1920, with all the commerce happening in Heppner, the community would die off as residents were forced to move closer to the economic centers. The post office that renamed the town would be reduced to partial operation by the 1940s and would ultimately close in 1968 along with Hardman's last known businesses, which essentially signified the death of the town and gave it its ghost town status. Now, while the town is listed as a ghost town or abandoned in many publications, 30 residents still list Hardman as their full-time residents. Another 20 or so own property and call Hardman home for part of the year. While basic shopping needs can be met 20 miles up the road in Heppner, any serious shopping is nearly 100 miles away, meaning the 30 folks that call Hardman home really enjoy the quiet life. And finally, if you're an avid cyclist or mountain biker, you may be familiar with the Hardman-Barlow Canyon and Arlington Trail. Thousands of enthusiasts visit the area each year from around the country. Here's what TravelOregon.com has to say about the ride. Quote, "Get a little taste of life on the Oregon Trail as you wander north from the high desert to the mighty Columbia River on this route that follows part of the Oregon Trail alternate in its last half. The good news for you is that it's a downhill ride, and you have a much more maneuverable vehicle than the pioneers traveled with. In the first stretch of riding on Hardman Ridge Road, the road turns primitive quickly for a mile or two from being a traveled pathway to something that looks like it hasn't been traveled in years. Then you'll see for yourself the odd demarcation of Hardman Hale Ridge. The one side should be known as Hale Ridge, and it once was, because it's the line between where wheat can't grow, the south, on the Hale side, and where it can grow, north, on the Hardman side. This is because of severe weather on one side, which often includes fierce hailstorms. For you, it provides a divided view that's both interesting and thought-provoking. After you crest and start dropping, you'll pass the old one-room Liberty School with its empty windows staring out at postcard views of Mount Hood. A long glide down Barlow Canyon Road will take you past weathered, abandoned homesteads that look like people just gathered a few things and moved out suddenly, which is exactly what happened in the 1940s. The progression of farmers and their families leaving went from high to low as the water table dried up. Today, you can still see the equipment they left behind, even curtains in windows. Take a moment to ponder the hardscrabble lives these folks lived on this rangeland, and the frailty of a rural existence. But you may not choose to stop and think, because you're having too much fun riding. By the time you reach Ione Gooseberry Road, you'll have rolled over 18 miles of uninterrupted gravel, some of it feeling smoother than the paved road as you fly by at speeds upwards of 30 miles an hour. After a brief climb to a plateau, follow Cayuse Canyon down on the modern version of a trail that intersects with the original Oregon Trail. And here's where you'll find another piece of history. As you ride through the wide open spaces, you'll notice oddly out-of-place grain silos in the middle of nowhere. Here's the story. After the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in World War II, the U.S. government wanted to protect its grain and food supply from potential attack in high-population, easily accessible areas. So, they built silos here, where they wouldn't be an attractive target. Around mile 30, as you ride along Ridge Road, you'll see the valley fall away dramatically to the east, as Rock Creek Canyon stretches seemingly forever west and northward. You can get lost in the scale of a place like this. Finally, after enjoying another 15 miles of gravel, you'll descend gradually into the town of Arlington, squeezing through Alkali Canyon just before hitting civilization and the vast power of the Columbia River. To finish off your experience, enjoy a refreshing swim at Earl Snell Park and then head over to the town of Boardman to visit the SAGE, which stands for Sustainable Agriculture and Energy Center. It's an interactive visitor center that offers various exhibits and events. And feel like a bicycle pioneer. Close quote. Continuing on from Hardman, some 150 miles up the road, we would pass through Unity, Oregon. In many ways, Unity looked very much like Hardman. Many abandoned buildings, mere remnants of all the hard work folks had put into the area all those years ago. Unity emerged as a community during the westward expansion, as did all the other communities in the area because of the nation's quest to reach the Oregon country. Unity's growth, unlike Hardman, would not be centered around a stagecoach stop, but rather by pure optimism, hard work, and the promise of the fertile soil. But the area's struggles would begin early on, given economic fluctuations, changing industries, and shifts in population to the larger metro areas. In fact, the town of Unity was never actually platted. However, a post office was established in 1891 and remains in operation today. The population of the community would rise to some 40 pioneers, and here we are, some 130 years later, and yup, still 40 permanent residents. My guess would be that the differentiating factor between Hardman and Unity, similar in population, but one still operates a post office and the other doesn't, would be Unity's much closer proximity to a larger metro area, that being Baker City with a population of around 10,000. And it's just 60 miles or so up the road, which makes a commute doable for anyone interested in spending a few hours a week in their car. Ah, and I almost forgot. That little life in an RV lesson I learned, all about gas stations. Now, I know that there are actually places I can find myself over 125 miles away from a gas station. I also know that when you get to that gas station, you could also find a handwritten sign in the door that says, "Closed, out of gas." No biggie, right? Just call roadside assistance for a gas-up service. Nope. Not with no cell service. The next 27 miles into John Day, Oregon, with the needle clicking closer to empty with each passing mile, all kinds of random thoughts rambled through my head, like, based on what we had seen in the 80 miles behind us, the odds of running across a house that somebody actually lives in? Pretty slim. It's too hot to leave the boys locked in the RV while I go for gas, so I started to picture what it could look like. As I walked along a 2-lane road in eastern Oregon, Billie on one side, Dougie on the other, while I figured out how to carry a 5-gallon gas can. Thankfully, none of that happened. We made it into John Day and gassed up. Lesson being, if you plan to spend days on end exploring the roads of rural America, it's a big place. So just top off the gas tank every chance you get. You'll be glad you did. Oh yeah, and if a little slice of rural America is on your bucket list, I know where you can get your hands on a couple of acres, complete with a restaurant and a single-wide mobile home for a mere $69,000. You will be likely cooking for yourself on most occasions in that restaurant, but who knows? Make a few friends with those 40 or so neighbors and a dinner guest or two maybe at the table with you. Yep, I wrote down the number. May just have to head back through this way at some point. Like I said, in a world of internet and drones, maybe supper with a friend or two in a quiet little piece of the Oregon country is just what the doctor ordered. But for now, we kept going. The map says if we're going to avoid the crowds, we would be headed out through the John Day River Basin area and then on into Fairfield, Idaho. I wonder what we'll learn there. Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.